Someone just asked Talon. Yes, I did manage to get some food this morning to gird myself for the next 90 minutes.
Oh yeah, that was a problem last time, to have a little food beforehand. And I think you got your stopwatch again. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
Right, exactly. So I'm going to use the stopwatch to time the questions. All right, good. All right, Alex, why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks
When
everybody
ready.
again.
Start when ready.
Thanks for coming out to the second book club AMA. We are going to make this really short and just get started with it. We got about 24 questions already. We think that we should have enough time to get through all of those. Gina's got a stopwatch. Feel free to post any additional ones in the Q&A or in the AMA channel, and then I will keep adding those to the queue. So let us get started.
Yeah, and to be clear, yeah, you have 26 questions, and so we do have room for more. All right. By the way, just to reflect on last time, I thought it was I was like dazzled by all the questions and the breadth of ground that we covered. So thank you for joining again this week. All right, question time. Starting the stopwatch. Oops, hang on. Let me arrange my windows so that I can see both. All right. Okay, question number 1 from Talon, Aiken, and Andy Tinkham. Why does Dr. Erik refer to people as sensei? Why does Erik forget names? What is the reasoning behind that choice? Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, first off, like some people asked, why did Erik suddenly start calling people sensei? So would you believe that in an earlier, that Erik actually did that in the Unicorn project, but it was edited out during kind of developmental editing phase, and I didn't know that. So when I discovered that Erik stopped calling people sensei in the Phoenix project was actually when I picked up the hardcover book. I was kind of horrified. Anyway, so we never did go change it back in, just because it seemed a little bit. It was too late, but it was important to me that Erik do call people sensei in the Unicorn project. And these are people I hold in very high regard. So just like when people have a PhD in general, I like to call them by doctor, whatever, whether it's Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Dr. Topo Pal, Dr. Mick Kirsten, just because I know how much work they put in to get their PhD is something I admire and respect. And so in a similar way, Erik, the people that Erik holds in high esteem, they get elevated, venerated, to the sensei thing. So it's just an indication that they're kind of held at a very high level, like Erik's honorary PhD. Why does Erik forget names? So in the Phoenix project, Erik forgets anyone's name who doesn't sort of have their epiphany, aha moment, hasn't become enlightened. So I think. In particular, like John, after he has a sort of transformative moment, and when he comes back having lost 20 pounds and shaved his head and is wearing kind of his snazzy vest, right? Erik always forgets his name, but after that moment, then John is one of the few people that Erik calls by the correct names. So I think in the manuscript, there's a very specific point where for each person, whether their names are remembered. Anyway, so that's the answer. Okay, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Great question. And by the way, just as a little reflection as the author, I've always kind of, I'm always surprised by how quickly people pick up on those things and how people kind of deconstruct the Phoenix project. And I'm always kind of maybe when you asked that question, it was kind of surprising to me that no one had ever written about that before. All right, number 2, Keith Clunt. Perhaps an observation, but I'll try to turn it into a question. Much of what I read in both the Phoenix project and Unicorn project, as well as DORA, ITRF publications, does not explicitly address team structure, at least not in the explicit way that project to product does, team topology does. In my experience, that allows many engineering leaders who express love for DevOps but still adhere to matrix organization structures to believe that org structure is not a contributor to team organization success. I had lunch with a VP today who said as much. A matrix organization in which dev managers allocate team members to different projects is as effective as a dedicated autonomous product team org. I would love to see concepts from project to product and team topologies be made more explicit in DORA IT Rev publications. Does Gene have an opinion on this? Yeah, for sure. Actually, so yeah, Product and Team Topologies are IT Rev publications. But yeah, I guess that interesting. Yeah, the project to product model never really made it into DORA and Accelerate. Huh. That's actually surprising to me. I kind of have this recollection that they were, but maybe that sounds like a good. Let me go study Accelerate, and I'm actually if we never had a question on that, I would actually be a little bit surprised. But if that's the case, then that is definitely a great candidate for 2020 DORA. So, Alex, if you could add that to our list of actions to take, and I'll make sure to pass that on to Nicole and team. Okay, great. 1 minute, 50 seconds. 3, Talon. Again, one game I was playing while reading the Phoenix Project was associating characters with coworkers. Writers usually base characters in their own books on real people that they've interacted with. I'm wondering who the real Brent or Maxine or Dr. Erik. Interesting. And then Alex, you might want to mute. I can hear your keyboard. Yeah. So I would say almost all the characters in the Phoenix Project were a synthesis of people that I've run into in my journey. There was specifically kind of a specific artifact document I kept for almost 15 years. That started off on a Palm Pilot 3, moved to my Trio, moved to my BlackBerry, moved to my iPhone. And it was called the quote file. So whenever I heard something really interesting, funny, asinine, unbelievable, I would put it in the quote file. And then, in the development of the Phoenix Project, I would put it into the, really the characters were a vehicle to deliver the lines, that were in the quote file. So Bill was definitely a synthesis of characters that, I admired and people leading these high performing technology organizations. And Brent, and certainly, Wes and Patty Wes was the embodiment of all the people who would say no to things and would express things, express why they wouldn't think we should do something. Patty was very much the idealist, and was definitely about process, whether it was kind of ITIL processes or kind of Kanban queuing processes. And Erik, Erik was very much modeled after Jonah in the goal. So I think there was a question that we'll tackle later on about mentors, right? Erik is not a mentor, right? Erik is ideally you wouldn't want a mentor like Erik, right? You want people who are actually willing to go more out of the way to help you and not send you on scavenger hunts. Although that was helpful to Bill. Maxine, Brent. Brent is actually one of the few people who it was actually based on a very specific person, and we didn't rename them. So Brent was actually a colleague of Kevin Bear, one of my co-authors of the Phoenix Project. And so he was definitely the person who no outage could be fixed without Brent, no major piece of work could be done without Brent. His name is Brent Schultz. He worked for the CISO at Symantec. He's off to doing great things. I actually ran into him 5 years ago in person when I was giving a talk about the Phoenix Project in Seattle. So Brent's doing great. Maxine, Maxine is very much informed by my love of development. Actually, I'm surprised I haven't shared this. For those of you who haven't heard, and you've probably seen this in the talks I give, for 25 years, I've self-identified as a ops person, despite getting my graduate degree in compiler design and high-speed networking. And the reason why I loved ops so much is that it was my observation that ops was where the saves are made. Ops saved the customers from terrible developers who blew up everything in production. Ops actually was the ones who secured things because despite ineffective security people, and then learning Clojure, this functional programming language that runs on the JVM, is what really reintroduced the joy of coding to me. And so much of Maxine was informed by just the sensibilities that I learned through that experience. So much of Maxine's beliefs were informed by, very much modeled after people like Mike Nygaard, who wrote the Release It book, Cornelia Davis, who was at Pivotal, Rich Hickey, the creator of the functional of Clojure, the functional programming language, and so Maxine is really meant to model kind of their experiences, sensibilities, beliefs, and philosophies. And then kind of the joy that she gets is very much modeled after my own experience, really rediscovering the joy of coding and building things. Great question. 4 minutes, 40 seconds. Number 4, Mike Snyder. I'm wondering if anyone has done a similar evolution of DataHub transforms a Narwhal. Would you be willing to give me the basics of the architectural approach you applied? I have a client who could use some help understanding some different basic approaches to modernizing how their data is integrated and made available for the business to use in new ways without just subscribing to a massive ETL and consolidation effort. Yeah, that one's easy. That one is very much based on the work that Heather Mickman did when she was the Senior Director of Development at Target. And so this is what she talked about. And so Heather Mickman and Ross Clanton spoke at DevOps Enterprise for 4 years, 14, 15, 16, 3 years in a row. So this is based on Heather Mickman's, what they call the API Enablement Project. So this was all about the specific problem that they set out to solve was that every time a new dev team wanted access to data that they didn't have, systems record, pricing, promotion, inventory, store information, they would have to wait 6 to 9 months for the integration teams to create the integration. Everything was point to point. And so they created this next generation, system of record. That's not quite true, right? They made this architectural change so that it was a proxy for all the systems record where they put everything there, and they did all the normalization, they canonicalized everything, so that business units could just use that on demand, versioned APIs out of the box, and that was running on Cassandra, so I would recommend you watch their videos. That's cited in the DevOps handbook. And specifically, I think it was a 2015 presentation. Basically, Alex, why don't you send out the link for all the Heather Mickman presentations from Target? She actually presented last year in Vegas, and she's doing the same thing at Optum, the world's largest healthcare company, which is freaking amazing. And it's basically, I think, an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude larger in scope. And by the way, Heather Mickman, actually, by the time she left Target, I think she had 170 engineers working for her. 53 business initiatives were credited and enabled through that effort. And so by the time, by now in 2020, there's hundreds of initiatives that were enabled by that. So ship to store, a bunch of the in-store applications for Target employees. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but basically, if you, what major business initiative could you, all of them needed it, and that was the best way to get that information. So Alex will post those videos. And incidentally, Alex, one more action item is there's a person who just tweeted at me like last week. I need to get to. He's actually presenting on something similar at I think the Philadelphia DevOps meetup. So I actually want to go watch that presentation because apparently that's exactly their area of expertise. Oh, one more thing. There's another. Alex, I'll send you the link of the presentations of Ross Mason. So he was a co-founder of MuleSoft. So they're in the API business, and his presentations are amazing. It's about really how do you create the API ecosystem and essentially do exactly what's described in the Unicorn project, and create discoverability so that so that people can serendipitously discover what data is within the organization. Great stuff. So anyway, I would also recommend you see the Optum presentation as well. So great stuff. That's probably definitely worth a blog post. And keep me posted on that journey. In fact, and if you want to present at DevOps Enterprise on that, let me know or just submit to the CFP. All right. Next question. Wait, did I answer all of that? Cool. Okay. Par Krarup. We, the rebels, were inspired by the Phoenix Project to do continuous deployments on physical products inside of our full-scale manufacturing plant. Do you know of anyone who is have tried or considered something similar? It would be nice to trade experience. Our context: the company has $1 billion of revenue. Everyone else is doing changes through stage gate projects on an annual release cycle, the maximum of 6 months deployment lead time. The production start date is locked down 2 or 3 years in advance. Prototypes have been replaced by massive design review boards. Imagine the change at every production start. For physical products of our full-scale manufacturing plant. I think Scott Prue, who I mentioned in the last Ask Me Anything, is doing something similar because he owns, CSG is the nation's largest bill printing company. And so it would surprise me so within the scope of responsibilities are those all for the plant control systems. Alex, let me cue that up for next session, and let me think about that a little bit more. That one deserves a better response, and it's just elusive to me right now. I'll get back to you on that, and my expectation. Let me set your expectations. I'll give you some concrete company names of people, and ideally presentations. So to be continued. 6. Rayner. Hi, I am wondering about the ways an architect can increase flow. Can you give me some examples? What is the most important skill of an architect to increase flow? Oh, that's interesting. So last time I'm pretty sure I had referred people to Dr. McKirsten's presentation, the last plenary presentation that he gave, which I think was in London, or was it in Vegas? Actually, no, it was in Vegas 2020. It was, but it wasn't plenary. But if you listen to the last 10 minutes of it, he specifically he gives like 3 examples of that, of flow problems and how they fixed it. And so let me see if I can recall a couple of them. One example that he gave was, they were specifically looking for wait states, in terms of like, why aren't developers more productive? Typically because they're waiting on things. And so in one particular case, they had a product, and these are all internal case studies, which was just even better because he was presenting all the information on it. One was for a specific product where they had like a month integration testing cycles. And so they spent, I think, a quarter basically re-platforming that so that they could actually test within minutes or hours as opposed to weeks or months. And so that dramatically improved flow. And they went from the most unhappy team in the company to the most happy team. There was another one that was about, they had switched from Java to Scala. And the specific worry was that the goal was to actually make it easier for developers to be productive. And I think over a couple of intervals, they were actually really worried that maybe it wasn't working, that maybe, quote, I think the quote he used was, maybe our developers aren't smart enough to use Scala. And so they were about ready to yank that initiative back. And the team leads no, we've got this. We just need, another interval or 2, and then they actually did see the productivity gains that they were expecting. So that was awesome. So in this case, it was a language. I don't think it was a port, but they were doing new initiatives in a new language to help them get better at it. A third one was. I think there might have been one where it was there was certain things that were like cross-cutting concerns, like the canonicalization of work item IDs, and so it meant that every team was taking on the load of having to, whether it was serialize or canonicalize or whatever. I don't remember the exact details, but the architectural change was that then moved to a central function, so that because it was a cross-cutting concern, one team could focus on it, and then everyone else could benefit from that work. So, those are very specific examples. I would call the Abidas refactoring at Amazon a famous one, where they moved everything to kind of firm API boundaries. So what are the skills of great architects? I mean, I think it's these sensibilities of how to decomplex things in a way, to use the Rich Hickey language, the things that are intertwined, how to separate them so that A doesn't know about B and vice versa, because only then can things be decoupled. And that seems to be a one thing that architects are really good at. I think another thing is creating these platforms that enable developers to be productive. So in other words, platforms or anything that has a cross-cutting concern, how do you remove that responsibility from the teams and move that into kind of a specialized area so only one team has to worry about it? So, I think those are really about taking a systems view, these kind of sensibilities of how to separate things. And then I think another thing is maybe just knowing what's possible. So I think these people are very good at studying what other people have done, kind of understanding what the patterns are, and then seeing how those could be applicable to the problems that you face. So that's maybe not the best answer, but I think the best person in the game is definitely Dr. McKirsten. I would just recommend any presentation that he gives. Okay, 4 minutes, 40 seconds, maybe a little bit off pace, Alex, but I'm not worried yet. The problem is like these are such fun questions. Okay. 7, Roman Pickle. What are your thoughts on developer productivity teams? Yeah, in fact, the previous questions. Yeah, so kind of aha moments was this kind of inversion of values. And, so I love this model where there's kind of these 3 categories of work, right? You have the applications, and I think I talked about this last time, the features, right? Those are, anyone can get budget for those because everyone sees it. They see the app, they see the feature. In general, in most organizations, they put their best developers there. Kind of the next tier down are the systems of record, back-end systems. So the people who aren't good enough to work on features, they get put to work there. and then the last tier is dev productivity, which is where you put the summer interns. They're the people who build and maintain the Jenkins pipelines and so forth. And so what I'm just dazzled by is in the tech giants, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, it's the exact opposite, right? They put their best people on dev productivity. Then it's the common platforms. And then kind of, if you're not good enough for those 2, you work in feature teams, right? And, what the best marker of this is that, if you look at where all the PhDs in static code analysis, programming languages, right? They are in that top tier, right? And one of the very few places where you go work is at Google and Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. Kent Beck was in that category, who founded Extreme Programming, helped create Agile and so forth, right? That's the kind of work that he was doing at Facebook. So, so I think those are the teams that enable every other developer to become more productive. So, I think they just have, like the architecture, they have the sensibilities of what is needed to make developers more productive. In fact, I think one of my favorite quotes in the DevOps handbook was from Kent Beck? They said, so Facebook famously deployed every day at 2 p.m. So whatever was in master would go through some sort of test cycle, and they would do a push at 2 p.m. And they did at 2 p.m. Pacific time because everyone was in the office. So if something went terribly wrong, right, there was still time to, redo things, and everyone is, still there before they left at 5. But then as they created a London office, it was actually very inconvenient for them, right, because they would have to wait a day to push their code. So they ended up doing 2 production pushes per day. And I think that was very much informed by Chuck Rossi, I think, who was like director of operation at Facebook. And Kent Beck even did an article about how they needed to actually do 2 production pushes. I don't even know how many production pushes they do per day now. But anyway, so it's not about just platforms. It's about these systemic issues of like, how does one do deployment, or how is work done? And it goes beyond just the deployment tools, but about just how the entire organization works. So hopefully that's helpful. Steve, I'm on number 8. Gene, what do you suppose the origin of the ancient powerful order, aka the bureaucracy silos, is, given that it exists in so many organizations? Oh, great question. In fact, I was just talking about this with Dr. Stephen Spear, a mentor of mine, yesterday. And one of my favorite books that I know I've blogged about is The Other Side of Innovation by Dr. Govindarajan and Dr. Trumbull. They're 2 professors out of Dartmouth University in the business school. And they ask something similar in a slightly different frame, which is, they asked why do innovation efforts fail in most organizations? And their answer was that it's because of these very powerful bureaucracies. And the reason they give is that when organizations become very successful, in fact, these organizations, so what creates greatness in their mind, right? So greatness is multi-billion dollars of revenue that are sustained over decades. And they say that it's because they create a performance engine. So the performance engine is what sustains greatness over time. And so that means in product development, in supply chain, in sales and marketing, right? So this is when you create processes and bureaucracies, because they're very resilient. You can take out half the bureaucrats and the processes still survive, which is the definition of resilience. And so the reason they say the reason why innovation efforts fail is because everything they're trying to do is actually against everything that the innovation engine is trying to do. The performance engine will impede it. So they basically create the notion of a dedicated team. They're separated from the performance engine, held to a different set of rules and standards and regulations and so forth. It's led by someone who has respect from the performance engine, who's probably has done lots of time in the performance engine. And that person, everyone knows, has the best long-term interests of the organization at heart. So, I think that explains, and so this book studies, where innovation efforts succeeded. It was the BMW electric car project, the first trail running shoe at Timberline, the first digital operation at Wall Street Journal. It was the first small tractor line at John Deere. So I think they did a great job in really explaining why performance engines exist, why they're organized that way, what are the characteristics of them. And I think the same thing has happened in technology. Maybe not with the great outcomes, but I think it certainly does explain why things are organized in the way they do. And maybe I'll just want to mention one more thing. And it just came from Courtney Kistler, who is very much, she's on the program committee for DevOps Enterprise. She did time at Starbucks, at Nordstrom, at Nike. And this actually I learned from Dr. Stephen Spear in his MIT workshop. Is there's kind of 2 ways to organize. You can organize for cost, optimize for cost, or you can optimize for speed. And so that's optimizing for cost is where you end up with functional silos. It's also where you optimize for skill. So when you have very deep expertise areas, which is why they do that in like aircraft carriers. You want all the aviation people to be in one place, all the ordnance people to be in another place, all the cooks and meal prep people in another place, because there's not a lot of value in cross-functional teams there, because you really need expertise to be honed. And then you have optimizing for speed, which is where you have those cross-functional teams. And I think that is actually pretty well written up in the DevOps handbook. And I think I might have some citations there. So hopefully that gives you some pointers on where ancient powerful orders come from. Oh, so the rebellion is definitely choosing to optimize for speed, right? So I love that quote. And I actually found the provenance of the quote while writing the resource guide for the Unicorn Project. It's not fast. It's not big beats small. It's fast beats slow. And so that actually came from Rupert Murdoch. And I think I heard it first through Chris O'Malley, the CEO of CompuWare. Anyway, so I can't wait to read. I think that's definitely the frame for the age of software. It is all about speed. Number 9, Erik. Part 2 kicks off with the announcement of the 1-month feature freeze for Parts Unlimited, which we saw in the Phoenix project, and it was a huge success. I've read about the successful feature freeze with LinkedIn's Inversion. Oh, that's great. And Microsoft's freeze for SQL Server security updates in the early 80s. Love that article. I was wondering if you all knew about some unsuccessful feature freezes and what might have characterized those versus successful ones. Boy, that is a great question. So you're, yeah, you're alluding to, you're pointing out sort of the survivor bias, right? It's like we only hear about the survivors and not the ones that didn't survive. Yes, there is one. In fact, this is so good. I'm gonna look for it right now. Hang on, there was actually one that was amazing, and I love this even more, because it's about something that I've written about before, which is Etsy Sprouter, which is one of my favorite case studies about the birth and death of Sprouter at Etsy, which is this middleware they put between devs and on the front end inside of PHP and the DBAs on the back end who are working inside of Postgres stored procedures. And so that was like this incredible problem, because it just meant that you had to have 3 teams to have to communicate, coordinate, marshal, sequence, deconflict, and so forth for anything to get done. And it would lend to horrendous outcomes where basically every deployment became a mini outage. And when you're doing 30 deployments a day, that's a real problem. So that's that presentation about killing Sprouter by, I think it was like Ross Snyder, was, I think, one of the best presentations I've seen. But it turns out that there's someone who actually wrote extensively about their attempt to kill Sprouter that came before it. Let me just switch Slack channels. I'm going to find this because it's just that good. Hang on. In Twitter, I store all my tweets and stars inside of, because searching Twitter is so hard, I store everyone in Slack because Slack is so good at searching. Oh man, yeah, wow. Okay, I'm pulling it up right now. This is amazing. Here is a tweet from Dan McKinley, who actually is a Clojure fan. And he was part of the first attempt to replace Sprouter, which is just incredible. I mean, it's just, I love, Twitter can be so amazing because you get to serendipitously discover like gems like this. So Alex, I'm just gonna DM this to you. If you can just send that out. This thread talks about this ambitious effort to replace Sprouter that just didn't work. And he goes into the horrible, horrible things that went wrong. So that happened. I mean, there was definitely a will to solve the problem, but maybe it wasn't skill or there was something that they did wrong. I think this is awesome. In fact, Alex, I would maybe let's cue this up as an action. I'd love to actually write about this in a blog article. And to the person who asked this, if you could read this and give your impressions and post it somewhere in a Slack message or in a tweet with your synthesis of it, I think that would be amazing. And just mention Alex and me, and I'd love to actually see what you read up. Great question, fun. And by the way, Dan McKinley is brilliant. I mean, just a top-notch thinker. That was 3 minutes, 30 seconds. 10, Denver. What are some of the ways you would recommend to convert executive management to the rebellion? I think it is easier to find engineers and developers, but not hard to convince them to work towards the greater good. It is hard to find executives that could help. What are ways that you think we can approach those that we start seeing as that we can start moving the needle? This has been one of my top aspirations for the DevOps Enterprise Summit. In fact, we have a whole track called Spanning the Business and Technology Divide, where we are looking for business leaders to go on stage with their technology leader counterpart and talk about how all their dreams and aspirations and goals could not have been achieved if it weren't for these incredible rebel leaders, who could help them achieve their goals. And so we're not looking for people to just acknowledge the technology leader. We're looking for people to gush and endlessly thank those people who have a sense of gratitude and appreciation, who tirelessly helped that technology leader remove obstacles and find more money and do all the things that need to be done. And so I would say anytime you see more than one person present on the plenary stage at DevOps Enterprise, in general, those tend to be business leader, technology leader presentations. And in fact, Alex, maybe a question to you is, do we tag the tracks of the plenary presentations? If we do, then maybe that's an easy way to pull them out. Anyway, so my advice is look at any of those presentations. If they're on the plenary stage and they are a business leader and a technology leader, I'll give you one. One of them was a Scott Prue presentation from CSG that was given with his product counterpart. Which one was that? That was such a great presentation. I think that was in 2018. Another, Alex, I can come up with a list. Let's work on a list together of those presentations, because those are the most exciting presentations for me. Another one is Werner Lutz from US Bank. So that he presented with an engineering leader and his boss. So he came from a strategy background. I think he came from McKinsey. So he's an executive vice president. So in charge of all of like consumer transformation. So these are, another great one was Comcast last year in Vegas. So that was, the business leader wasn't there, but they actually talked about how that team was acknowledged by the CEO. I think John Roberts. So I think these are great presentations that show how teams earn the respect and value and respect of their business counterpart. So Alex, why don't you and I take the action item to create a curated list of just the spanning the business technology divide presentations, and then to concretely. So one, I think you should watch that. And then two is I would send that video out to prospective business rebellion sympathizers and to say, hey, here's a way that another one was Capital One. John Schmidt was the director of product strategy at Capital One, co-presenting with Amy Bechtel, who was part of the DevOps Dojo. And so basically he's talking about like how all their machine learning initiatives were in trouble, and then it was actually through the dojo's help that they were able to achieve their goals. These are phenomenal presentations, and they're given from the business perspective. And so whenever you see those so I would send a couple of those links out to them and just say, hey, does this resonate with you? And I would love to brainstorm about ways for us to do something similar at our organization. And I love it because what it should do is say, hey, the person on stage is like me, right? And you are the person like the technology leader, right? And I think it just gives a very concrete way of saying, here's wouldn't you like to do this together to co-create something? I would also put in there the any panel that I've done with Chris O'Malley, the CEO of CompuWare. I love the one that he did with the CFO, Joe Fay. So just these are all intended and designed to speak to business leadership, right, to help sponsor better ways of working. Okay, maybe the John Smart one also goes there, right, with that he did with Director of Project Management. Okay, great question, and please keep me posted. So we have some action items. Alex and I will create a list of videos for you, and I would love a report out on how it went, and keep me posted. I'd love to help in any way I can. I see a chat. Oh, Brian Clark. Thank you. Brian Clark was from CSG that co-presented with Scott Prue. Mark, thank you, Mark Fuller. I thought that was Alex. Awesome. Yes. And he was the VP of product. So the profit and loss owner for like an $800 million line of business for a publicly traded company. Okay, next. Proctor. Good hearing from you again. Having looked across the industry, are there any signs or signals that represent likely showstoppers for transformation? What are the lead dominoes that have to fail before one can pull off the mindset change? accelerate and the state of DevOps reports give a number of items involved, but are there things that are linchpin to the transformation being successful or unsuccessful? Great question. I think it's very much similar to what the previous question was, which is, I think, right? And the reason why the business technology divide, spanning that business technology divide is such a focus area for us in the DevOps Enterprise Program Committee is because that is the obstacle now, right? Is that, in order for these transformations to really succeed, digital disruption, whatever you call it, right? I mean, those are not technology transformation issues, right? It's a business transformation issue. And so for that, we need business leadership fully on board. I think one of the best statistics on this came from a McKinsey study that came out last year. And this was cited in Mick Kirsten's presentation, that over $1 trillion will have been spent in 2019 to do digital disruption, and 90% of them have no monetary return whatsoever. So, I think the number is 1.2 trillion. Whatever it is, like the number comes out to $850 billion of wasted effort. So it says there's demand for this, like whatever is spawning that, there's an appetite to do these changes. So I think one of the necessary conditions is for someone at the top to be thinking about this. And as Chris O'Malley from CompuWare said, there's no board on the planet that isn't talking about, in a Fortune 500 company that isn't thinking about it. So that's the good news. But now we got to find someone like Werner Lutz, the EVP at US Bank, right, to fully sponsor it. So, and so just to hear him talk about the business imperative, right, it was really, that started off as a focused effort when Minneapolis hosted the Super Bowl. And so they had this crash program around, how do we make ourselves visible in the Super Bowl, and how do we build things quickly? And that really sustained itself even after that Super Bowl. It was like, all right, this is going to change how we work. We want to reimagine ways to deliver value to our customers. They created a dedicated team, totally different floor space, right? Very much like alluded to in the other side of innovation. So then I think that really sets the stage where you have this incredible initiative that, there's no doubt in Werner's mind when you hear him talk that his success is totally dependent on, I can see his face. What is his name? And just to see how they talk and interact with each other is just awesome. So yeah, I would say, Proctor, I would look for the most senior person on the business side who cares about these things, and what is the strength of that relationship between them and their technology counterparts. And yeah, and I think if there's a person that person is working with, that there's a mutually trusted relationship, or even a shot at a mutually trusted relationship. I think in my mind, that is the most critical precondition. So is there a digital transformation effort underway that's being talked about? And then who's that person working with on the business, who's in charge of that on the business side, and who are they working with, and are they getting the help that they need to actually achieve all their goals, dreams, and aspirations? If you want to talk more about that, Proctor, you know how to reach me. Proctor's the person whose podcast, Functional Geekery, I'm just a huge fan of. It was great to be on his podcast last year. Okay. 12, Jess, do you have any suggestions on ways to quantify value of having a feature freeze, or after a feature freeze, quantifying the value of what was accomplished? How about any suggestions on typical general items to prioritize first for a feature freeze that would make the biggest difference? I don't have any, I can give you one that is, it's a great question. Let me take a drink of water and think about that for a moment. So I'll tell you what it can't be, right? It can't be features, right? Because specifically we're talking about like, we're not working on features, but we're going to deliver something else, right? So the flow framework by McKirsten gives us kind of the frame of what the answers have to be in, right? It has to be, if it's not a feature, the other three are defects, risks, and debts. So by definition, we have to be able to articulate the value in our ability to reduce the number of defects, to increase our ability to deliver services reliably, securely, et cetera, right? All the things that the risks we need to mitigate, and then reduce our technical debt. And then we measure technical debt by the opposite of technical debt is architecture, right? Our ability to increase flow, right? So kind of to allude to the previous answers, everything really should be, at least in this frame, is like how much are we able to increase developer productivity? Meaning, can they do their work without toil, to reduce the wait states by reducing the dependencies with other teams, whether it's other feature teams or other infrastructure teams, storage, networking, security, whatever, right? To what degree can we enable them to work independently so they can develop, test, and deploy value to customers independently, right? And that's what that's improving flow as measured by reduction of lead times, by increasing the amount of time that they're able to work versus wait. So I think in general, I think that's the way we. Yeah, I love this, right? By logical rigor, right? Those are the ways that we have to be able to talk about the value we create during a feature freeze. So let me just test that answer. In Microsoft's example of the security stand down, right? They were able to reduce the number of systemic problems within their products across product lines and integrate security objectives into everyone's daily work. At eBay, they measured it by their ability to actually keep their site up, right? And also, they should be able to also measure their ability to actually have developers actually work on features again, which is actually a good thing, right? LinkedIn, they were actually able to dramatically increase the rate of feature delivery, and they talk about how deployments went from a 3-day horrendous affair to something that just happens on demand, and unleashed. In my view, like 2 orders of magnitude of productivity, as measured by features that are actually able to, be appreciated by customers. So yeah, I think those should all give you that. I think all of those are just a magnificent lens to measure the business value created by feature freezes. Alex, let's turn that into a blog post. I think that is just that's a great one. In fact, it makes me wish. Maybe in a second edition of Unicorn Project, we can actually put that down. That sounds pretty awesome. Just a little side note, just like it really upset me when senseis were accidentally removed out of the print out of the Phoenix project. It's just so hard to go back in. It's just kind of reluctant to make kind of big changes to anything that's out there. There's kind of so there's something about the long form writing style that makes it very difficult to change because everything's so tightly coupled together, and you don't really want to dramatically change the reading experience for people. Anyway, just a little observation. Actually, let me just do a little time check here. We are at 50 minutes, Alex. Is that right? Am I? Is that correct?
Yeah, we're a little over halfway.
Awesome. Okay, and we are on track to do. We're at number 13, so I think we're sort of on track.
Yeah, we might be a little behind on time.
Okay. All right. No worries. Condition yellow, not condition red. By the way, if could everyone just give maybe by an emoji reaction? How are we doing? And let us know. And then Alex, if you can start to report out on that in the next thing. So yeah, if everyone can just answer the question, how are you doing, and respond in the form of an emoji reaction, that would be great. You know what? I'm just gonna pop into that channel. Sweet. Okay, great. Thank you. Number 13. Follow up on my previous question regarding distinguished engineers. I think asking about what org size distinguished engineers was the wrong framing. Allow me to retry. What are the inflection points in an organization where considering a distinguished engineering role makes sense? Oh, now that's a great question. Okay, so this is really bothering me now because I'm going to refer to this person. So the person who presented with as Levi Geinert, who was an engineering director at Target. He was the one who is now a VP of engineering at US Bank, who co-presented with Werner Lutz at US Bank. So that was last year in 2019. The year before, he presented as part of a trio with a distinguished engineer, Dan Cundiff, and one of the product people, Luke. And so it's really interesting to hear about the creation of the DE role at Target, because they talk about this session they have with, so Dan called him Uncle Mike, Mike McNamara, the CIO of Target. Apparently every quarter he has like a multi-day offsite with all of his direct reports and the engineering directors, which I think is really interesting. And just even hearing about that format of the meeting is really talk about the weighty issues, that face the organization. And so I think we can start to derive, like, what are the conditions that lead to the creation of the DE role, which is that at what point is it not enough to have, just the senior managers there, right? I mean, it's like, if we're talking about, like, how do we get away from hostile vendors, and how do we, create a database strategy where, we're not reliant upon, vendors that we don't want to work with, or middleware companies we don't want to work with, or whatever. I mean, at that point, I think senior managers are good, but really even more valuable are domain experts, right? Who, their job is not to manage people; it's really to have strong opinions about what technology we should and shouldn't be using. And so, I think what's alluded to in the Unicorn Project, maybe not explicitly, is, so Parts Unlimited was at a stage where Bill and Chris, the VP of R&D and the CIO, right? They're not experts in message buses or architectures or et cetera, right? And Maxine is. And so she's serving a very critical role in how technology is used at Parts Unlimited, just like Dan Cundiff and the other distinguished engineers have their job is to identify what technologies are going to be used at Parts Unlimited. And it's so important that they're taking part in the senior leadership meetings. So that's a great question. You know what? Maybe that's a question that Dan Cundiff should talk about at DevOps Enterprise. And even if he doesn't, that's probably a good podcast episode or something. So Alex, why don't you take that on? Let's record that, and maybe as a aspiration for 2020, I'd love to get you better answers on that. It's a great question, and I think it would be valuable to the entire community to actually have a better answer for that. So, and Alex, I think we should be having meetings, by a meeting specifically about how we kind of process all of these in the next couple weeks. All right. Great question. Philippe, by the way, great story about you using Unicorn Project clients to find fellow rebels and and help grow the cause. I just love that. In fact, I was talking to Jason Cox from Disney, and we were talking about how much delight they're getting that the rebellion meme is sort of taking off within this community. So, rebel scum, we were joking. Okay, cool. To what measure would you agree that organization and architecture are a mirror of each other? Oh yeah, 100%. And okay, so this makes it difficult that if you want to address either, you have to address both. Technical debt needs to be addressed with the operational and organizational debts that go with it. Yes. Same question for accelerating DevOps with re-architecting monolithic environments. Getting the code of 200 devs to merge and build without issues is difficult. Breaking it down into smaller services, smaller teams, is a way of accelerating the DevOps practice, in my view, and a path to microservices too. Is there a max team size to service that you would recommend? I don't really have an opinion on that last one, just because I don't have a lot of experience, but I would look at Google, right, and just, okay, let me answer it backwards. Is our maximum size of service? In the DevOps handbook, there's a citation of Randy Schaup's work. He was the engineering director at App Engine. So that's sort of the platform as a service offering like Heroku instead of Google. And he actually talks about how the Google technologies are organized. So like, their equivalent of S3 buckets are on top of cloud storage or top of whatever, right? And it is like the team sizes are actually very small given sort of the scale of the services they operate. And there's a citation in there about how he talks about that. And he actually has an entire talk where he actually explains that and gives specific figures. I would refer you to that. And because I think that's um, the infrastructure that runs Google is a pretty massive thing, right? And so I would say that would probably represent a pretty accurate indicator of what the upper limit is of what team sizes are. He just makes the observation that these are services built upon other services, so the team sizes never get too large. To your other point is like you're pointing at the duality of organization and architecture. And yeah, that is actually the big aha moment for me. That really is one of the foundations of the Unicorn project, which is that it is not enough to move boxes around on the org chart, that the organization and the architecture have to be congruent, meaning that, and I think there's almost it's not an isomorphic mapping, it's the architecture has to support this way of working. Let me try that again. So if the goal is to get teams to be able to develop, test, and deploy value independently, right? If that's the goal, there has to be an architecture that supports it. And so there's a Conway's law in there somewhere, right? That I've never done this before, but I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint slide in an attempt to try to verbalize this. Because that question is so good. Just updated Microsoft Office. But it works. Okay, good. Alex, while I'm looking for this, can you give me a verbal readout of the emoji reactions? How are we doing?
Lots of thumbs ups, unicorns, smiley faces, inquisitive face, hundreds. We're looking good.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. So I had mentioned the birth and death of Etsy Sprouter, right, as the ultimate example of Conway's Law. So they had 3 teams working together, right, of which was included the terrible Sprouter thing that everyone loathed. And then the goal was to get to every team should be able to work independently. So that's a Conway, so it's one, right, that no team has to communicate and coordinate in order to deliver value to the feature. And I wrote down this aha moment, and this was after the DevOps handbook. So I don't think I've actually written this down in this way. So it makes it, I think this is why I'm struggling to verbalize it. The key lesson is that the organization and the architecture of our software must be congruent. In other words, you can have a bunch of teams, but if you don't have an architecture to support those teams to work independently, then we're just fooling ourselves. And so when you have a value stream where if this is a deployment value stream, if you initiate the ticket to deploy here and you have to transit across 20 different teams to deploy, right, then your architecture dictates that you do all this type of work. So yes, I think I very much agree with your assertion that there must be a congruence between the desired way of working as dictated by teams, the way you organize your teams, and the architecture that enables that way of working, right? So if you have feature teams that all should work independently, but you still have to do this, then you're actually all still coupled together. So I think that is my point. Philippe, if you want to discuss that further, let's do so. In fact, because I think it's worthy of being written down, because it's a very powerful one. In fact, and I think the Team Topologies book makes some even says it more verbally, or maybe I think it should be in there, right? Just take a picture of that page and post it.
Keith just shared. He said I think they use in team topologies the phrase socio-technical structures to describe the congruence of team architecture and team structure.
Brilliant. So yeah, Philippe, that's one angle, and I'm sure you wouldn't have asked that if that were enough. You wouldn't have asked that question. So let's talk further. Okay, we went a little over on that one. That was 6 minutes 30 seconds, but it was great. Scott, what do you think of the geographic distribution of DevOps maturities in the US? I'm looking in the Midwest, but find most of the top performing organizations I hear about are on the coast. Any tips on finding local elite or high performing organizations to learn from? That is interesting. We've never did that analysis in the State of DevOps report. But there was, the common wisdom that is wrong, right? Is that only financial services are doing this, or only certain vertical like retail are doing this, and it turns out that's actually quite wrong. That no demographic, the distribution of high, medium, and low performers is about the same. And it has been for 5 years, and that changed in the 2019 State of DevOps report, where retail was actually has disproportionately high number of high performers. So that's interesting. I would actually look for when you look if you're looking for elite performers. I have two answers. I would look at the good startups in the area because really startups are the good ones. The good startups, are adopting the best known methods of deploying software because their life and death depends on it, right? And they have ample reason. There's not a lot of legacy reasons to do things in an older way. That's not to say all startups are good, right? So find the ones who are doing innovative things that are growing, right? Chances are there's some good stuff happening there. And then also look at the DevOps enterprise list. At the very minimum, you can look for the speakers that span all geographies. I can say with confidence that representation of organizations is pretty even, and you'll find them all geographies. And then I wish that there were, I know we can't share the attendee list. I know that's not allowed, but I wonder if there's if you have gone to DevOps Enterprise, pop into the DevOps Enterprise Summit channel, Slack channel that we have, and I would actually just ask around in there. And I'll also look for any sort of DevOps meetups or something. Often, these are the people who are hiring. So there's the other organization that they're taking a very active role in community development and so forth, right? Because this is just one great way to recruit. For example, I went to just hang out with Jason Cox at Disney, right? They're hosting all the Docker meetups, right? Because they're looking for more people with skill in Docker. So yeah, so those are some very tactical tips I would recommend. 16. And that was a little over 2 minutes, Alex. 16, Scott. As a highly introverted person, I find remote first as an IT strategy extremely appealing. How does it change the DevOps formula? Any suggestions on how to mesh the two? A funny comment, by the way. Brad Feld recently did a post. So he's the famous investor behind Foundry Ventures. It's one of the funds with the top returns of the last 30 years. He just did a blog post. Alex, maybe you can find this. I got it through his newsletter about remote work and just how appealing it is and how much is being adopted. And I think it's just showing that remote work is more of a thing. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times about this as well. And like at GitHub, back in 2013, I think if you look at their SRE team or their infrastructure team, I think there was a point in time where no two engineers worked in the same city. So it was fully distributed. And so they were giving these great talks on, how they were adopting DevOps and amazing ways of working for fully remote teams. So basically optimized for the remote experience. Alex, why don't you sign me up for that action item to post that? In fact,
what was the name of the first one more time?
I'm sorry?
the name of the person one more time?
Bradfeld.
I think. Yeah, Kathy Keating just posted it, so we've got it in there.
That's awesome. This is such a great channel. I love this. In fact, I should not be posting this in my DM to you. I should be posting it in the chat message so everyone else can see it. The presentation I'm thinking of it was at Ruby Conf in Salt Lake City in 2013 from GitHub. Who was it? It was basically he was announcing the creation of their bot, like the deploy bot thing. Anyway, if you can, if Alex, let's go find that presentation. And if it's not that, yeah, and they talk a lot about how the bot enabled people to work better remotely, take better care of each other, do deployments, within the chat room. It was awesome. So the answer is remote work is definitely a thing, especially given that the search for talent, like Target talked about how, basically they couldn't find all the engineers they were looking for in the Twin Cities area, Mini St. Paul, and it was actually driving a whole bunch of hiring of remote employees. So it just says all the trends are working in your favor, in my opinion. Okay, number 17. Scott, any advice on making a low-performing DevOps organization appeal to individual contributors' experience from high-performing organizations? Closing the gap from behind when leaders are also more skilled at learning. Closing the gap from behind when leaders are also more skilled at learning is extremely difficult. That's an interesting question. I think what's making me recall is that a lot of people that I talk to, I mean, they're always looking for challenges. In fact, the reason why people leave organizations isn't because, they hate it. It's because they get bored. And so I think that happens a lot with leaders is that they get bored because they're not challenged anymore, and they want to they recall with fondness like solving tough problems. And so it's actually kind of a shame when leaders solve these great problems and then aren't asked to solve bigger problems. And maybe that's exogenous. Maybe it's because the company's not growing anymore, or maybe they're shrinking right now. So that's a whole bunch of challenges that aren't fun anymore. So I think there is, to answer your question, I think I would appeal to people in that situation where they're looking for new challenges, right? And I think it's a very easy appeal to say, hey, do you know of anyone who's looking for a role to help us pull off a transformation? And or would that include you? Right. The soft ask is you ask if they have any friends, or the more explicit ask is like, would you be interested? And I think your appeal is going to be based on not how great things are in technical practices, but what a great organization it is. How the mission of the organization, how good the people are. We just need someone who's done it before to help us get there faster. And I think those make for very compelling appeals. And so it sounds like you're in that position. I would love to know how that goes. So let me know how it goes, and if and whether it worked. And if it didn't work, let me know, and let's talk. 2 minutes 40 seconds. 18. David, can you speak more about the principle of locality? That's a new term for me, and I'm wondering where it came from and where I can learn more about it in terms of software. I finished the book, by the way, and really enjoyed it. Okay, great, awesome. Yeah, so I would refer you to the love letter to closure thing that I wrote last year. And I talk a lot about the first idea of locality and simplicity. And yeah, locality really is the ability to independently run and test your component in isolation from everything else, right? And so you can't have locality. Well, I suppose you can. So one aspect of locality is to what extent can you run and test things without having everything else present, right? So another one is just a measure of like, can you, if you need to do something, can you change it in one place, one file, one module, one namespace, one application, one container, one something, right? That's sort of the ideal. The not ideal is you have to change it everywhere, right? So you have to open up every namespace, every module, every application, make changes there, right? So it's scattered, or better yet, splattered everywhere. And I think I might have talked about last time was there's a whole thing about aspect-oriented programming that McChriston, he got his PhD in that. That actually showed up in Spring. So Spring incorporated, that's built on it's a Java framework, probably one of the most used frameworks on the planet. Very voraciously used aspect-oriented programming as a way. So aspect-oriented programming is you can take your cross-cutting concerns and make the change in one place, and then it gets can be used by every other component. So sidecars and Kubernetes is a way to do the same thing, so that things like authentication, logging, security type things, you can actually put in one container and one sidecar, and then have every container benefit from that. So those are all sort of like things that encourage locality. So I would look at that closure love letter, and I talk a lot about that. Oh gosh, to that architecture question, whoever asked about like architecture sensibilities. So like one of the big aha moments for me learning closure was one of the things that Rich Hickey talked about was the ability for queues to decouple components from each other. And that was just amazing to me. So I learned this again from Scott Havens, who was at Walmart, who came from Jet.com. And I asked him, how do I sort of take this book tracking tool that I wrote, where everything was so tightly coupled together, and I wanted to get away from this piece of code I wrote in Ruby to get to my SQL that was written in Active Record that was really hard to work with, and move it to Closure. And he said, put it on a pub sub queue, so like a Kafka thing, or whatever, right? And just post a message there, and now you've decoupled these two pieces from each other. It is amazing. It's just, even this trivial example of like this book tracking application I wrote, just putting things on queues make things more localized, so that they know nothing about each other, right? And the only way they can talk to each other is through the pub sub queue. So I think people are using Kafka for things like that. I think those kind of patterns are something that architects need to know about, because these are the patterns that allow for massive decoupling of services. And that's actually alluded to on the very last page of the Unicorn project before the epilogue. So anyway, yeah, I hope that helps you find more information about locality. Oh, by the way, the thing that closure love letter, I think was like 5,000 words. I mean, it was huge. And like I actually wrote about that. One of the biggest problems I had in my vocation as a programmer is that whatever I wrote would collapse in on itself like a house of cards after a couple of years. I mean, it would just become impossible to change. And writing this love letter closure, one of them, it made me realize I was making the same mistake in graduate school. So one of the projects was writing a Modula 3 compiler that would generate assembly code for Spark. So it was in graduate school. And the problem is, I had done something wrong in the code generation or assembly. I was walking through a stack backwards. And so on recursive it worked fine until we had to test it on recursive programs, and then it would just blow up. And it was impossible, despite like doing 3 all-nighters, or maybe it was a week of all-nighters. I couldn't fix it because I didn't write them in a way where they can be composed. In other words, every successive step was buried inside of the previous step. And so you couldn't independently run each phase without pulling all the other stuff in. And I wrote that in 1994. And I still remember to this day, it's like that was a failure of composition and locality. And so it was very cathartic to write that and just realize that I've been making the same mistake for, 25, calculator. 2019 minus 1994. I've been making the same mistake for 25 years. Right? So I think locality is something that, one should learn earlier in the career. 6 minutes. Holy cow. I went way over on that, but it's just so interesting to me. I had to. Sorry. All right. 19. Jess, can you help suggest ways to stop rewarding heroics? In the book, we see some people working overtime and performing heroics to get fixed problems, get releases in. It starts to become a pattern. And what gets recognition? Anything you've seen that could work to reward no issues, non-event releases? That's such a great question. I feel like I've written about this somewhere. It's reminding me of a lot of DevOps enterprise stories where things used to be, deployments used to be horrendous, and now they're routine. And now we're doing it multiple times a day. And it's reminding me of presentations that talk about celebrating those achievements that make it easier so people don't have to work overtime. So I think a concrete recommendation is have celebrations to celebrate milestones in getting there. Something that used to be tedious, error-prone, lengthy, that would create necessary heroics. We celebrate their elimination of. And it very much is like the hallmark of, and it's also reminding me of like the birth of automated testing at Google, where they did the same thing. And this was a multi-year effort to basically re-integrate automated testing into the way Google ships code. And I think it is about, and it started with testing on the toilet, TOTT, right? Where it started off as a guerrilla movement to put flyers in the bathroom stalls just to educate people on, what is automated testing, what are tips on how to do it better. That led to people pooling the 20% time, where they could work on whatever, and people pooling that time to create kind of guilds, I guess we would call it in today's terminology. To make a massive improvement in the automated test infrastructure, which it was, and that happened in 2005. That led to Google eventually running 150 million automated tests per day. It's one of the hallmarks of their software culture. So I think it really starts with celebrating every win, and stating that eliminating heroics is one of the long-term objectives of the company, because heroics and unplanned work aren't free, right? They come at the expense of other planned commitments that we make, right? So there's a huge cost paid, when we force people to do heroics, right? And then it sounds very much like the question around how do we measure the success and the business value of feature freezes, because by eliminating heroics, we can actually increase feature delivery. We can decrease the number of defects, we can increase the reliability and security, and decrease the risks associated with running our services, and we can reduce technical debt. So hopefully that's helpful. Great question. 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Pete, and we have 11 minutes left. I think we can do 3 more. Maxine was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award to Abolishing TEP LARB. And I've seen enough dysfunctional technical governance structures to cheer along with everything else. But the TEP was set up with honorable objectives. So if not through an ARB, how are those objectives best achieved? Yes. So by the way, let me show you the real TEP LARB certificate that actually came from Heather Mickman. I closed it by accident. Just because, this is the actual picture I took of Heather Mickman's desk when I shouted her for 3 days. And
I think we're seeing the wrong screen.
Oh,
Are you pulling up PowerPoint? Is that where you're getting it from?
Yeah.
Okay, that's working.
Oh, it's working. Oh. Yeah, that was taking some time. The real Heather Mickman certificate is here. All right, just for you to gaze upon. I just love this. So yeah, this is actually based on a real thing. And so Levi Geinert and Dan Kundov talked about the next generation architecture thing. And that was actually done. This is part of what is talked about in their multi-day offsite with the CIO, Mike McNamara. And I think their goal is to basically categorize technologies into 3 categories. We're using it, recommended, right? There's a strong community that's using this technology, and we have tons of experience in it, and we love it. Neutral, meaning kind of the jury's still out, and eliminate, meaning we have made a decision as a company that we're getting off of this. And so Scott Prue's presentation 2019 was all about this. What are their goal? Part of their goals is to eliminate their reliance on hostile vendors, as measured by these are the people who increase our prices during contract term renegotiation, right? And like, these people are actually jeopardizing our business. So I love that. I would recommend you watch the 2018 presentation from Target from Levi Geinert and Levi Geinert and Dan Kundov. So it should give you some ideas. And also, speaking of which, there's actually another presentation that I would recommend, which was from HP. This is before the breakup by their CIO, Ralph Laura. I think this is in 2015. And they talk about how the goal was to create boundaries, not buoys. Buoys, not boundaries? Yeah, right. The goal is to say where the safe channels in the harbor are. But if you need to stray outside that safe channel and you can follow the principles, you're authorized to do so, right? And maybe that will become adopted into one of the next points of greatness within the organization. It's a phenomenal presentation. So yeah, I think those hint at kind of what next generation architecture review boards should be. In fact, I think that is Maxine's job, right? Is to create the next generation architecture for Ports Unlimited. Next generation architecture review something. Now I'm curious. What is her job description? Her job description is oversee the architecture design. No. Guide the creation of a governance and architecture review function that can evolve and ensure the company obligations are fulfilled for years to come. Yeah, right. So, yeah, that is very much in the spirit of what Maxine is tasked to do. 7 minutes to go. 21. Hey, Gene, as an advocate for functional programming, and it is clear how it is better in most scenarios, my question is, are there any exceptions? Meaning, have you seen situations where you'd recommend solving with imperative programming instead because it would either be faster or take less memory than functional programming? And if so, which one? I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of like, I'm sure you're right? I mean, I think there are situations where I think in the Haskell community, they talk about there's some scenarios because of lazy evaluation. It's really difficult when things go wrong to find out where it went wrong. Clojure has similar, it's 2 is a lazy language that defers evaluation to when it's actually used. I've heard performance sometimes used as a reason. In Clojure, like one of the problems is slow startup times associated with the JVM, but now with the Graal VM thing, you can actually compile it down to native code, so it's as fast as Go. And I think even Rust, the Rust programming language, is meant to essentially replace C++ in a more with more functional programming and immutable sensibilities. Yeah, I think the languages are just so much better now. I mean, it's just amazing how much safer they are. And I think there is some evidence to suggest that static typing is probably a good thing when you're working with with larger teams, and that's something that Clojure as a dynamically typed language is not. It's very much a fundamentally dynamic language, so like Python. And there have been some efforts to do, there's something called Clojure spec that allows you to do runtime checking, which I use all the time. But the same, I think when you talk about, in fact, in that Clojure love letter, in that there's a video link to a John Carmack video. So he created Doom, Quake, right? He was the CTO at Oculus VR inside of Facebook. And he talks about how much, he relies on static typing, whether C++ or Haskell. So anyway, that's a different debate. But the functional programming scholar, he actually rewrote Castle Wolfenstein in Haskell, which was amazing, right? And I don't think he ever finished it, but it was just fascinating to hear him talk about it. I just highly recommend that video. Anyway, so for me, I'm just because after having programmed in a functional programming language, it's my go-to choice. I won't start a new project in something that's not Clojure. Every once in a while, I have to do some JavaScript here or there. And when I'm using JavaScript, I'll always use TypeScript because it's statically typed. It's so much safer. And anyway, so yeah, I love TypeScript, and that's not a functional programming language. Okay, I think we have one more. We'll push for one more, Alex. Great question, so much fun. Where does one find an Erik? Oh gosh. This one deserves a longer answer. Okay, let me touch on this one, and then why don't we queue this up for next time, Alex? Where does one find an Erik? Wondering how does one get progress at graduate level when it doesn't have the air cover backing at the executive level, like Maxine and Bill had with Erik, covering them with Steve and Dick? I would actually not. I don't think Erik was an active champion, like in the way that you're alluding to, right? I mean, it was really Bill. I mean, Erik didn't care enough, right? Erik didn't have to take any risks. Erik wasn't passionately advocating. He just knew what the better way looked like, right? So Erik is not. I don't think Erik is what we're looking for. Erik is looking for what we're looking for is a business sponsor and a technology sponsor to support better ways of working, right? We want those two people, who are willing to go up at DevOps Enterprise Summit and brag about how the biggest problem facing the organization were solved only through this incredible partnership between technology leadership and business leadership. And, I think this sounds glib, but I actually think this is so true, is that books are such a powerful way to find these people, right? So when you, as I put into the Slack channel, when someone says, I love the Unicorn Project or the Phoenix Project, it meant they spent 6 to 8 hours reading it, right? And it qualifies someone that says they have an interest, they recognize the problem exists, they believe the problem is significant, chances are they think it's relevant to the work that they do every day. And I've seen so many instances where books are able to serve as ways to find fellow rebels, find senior champions. And the Unicorn Project, I think, in my ideal, it is a great way to find business people who care about it. In fact, there's a LinkedIn post of Ken Kennedy, who is Scott Prue's boss at CSG. He's the president of CSG, the person ultimately responsible for the business functions for a public company, talking about how much he enjoyed reading the Unicorn Project and how greatness is created through amazing DevOps principles and a dedicated, amazing group of talented people. This is amazing, right? So here's an example of me benefiting from someone reading the Unicorn Project to find someone who cares about this that I didn't know about this before, right? So I'm hoping that Scott Prue will present with Ken Kennedy, his boss, the president of CSG, about how it is helping them achieve their goals, dreams, and aspirations and win in the marketplace. And so that would represent a level of seniority that we've never had at the DevOps Enterprise Summit before. So I think, I guess the reason why I bring this up is I am using the Unicorn Project in the same way that I think you will be using books to find, your Erik, your Bill, your Maggie, right? You're looking for the Maggie who is going to bring their toughest challenge and say, I need your help to help make this happen because the current ways of working don't work. All right, Alex, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll just comment. This was as stimulating, as interesting, as fun, and as tiring as last time, but so worthwhile. So we'll make the transcripts. We're going to get this transcripts created, and we'll make the videos available. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you for all your questions and your enthusiasm, and I hope this has been valuable to you. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex. Thank you. We're going to reconvene in 2 weeks. Is that right, Alex?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we got the last one with Gene scheduled. And thank you everyone for coming today and posting your questions. All the ones that we didn't get to, I'm capturing and putting in the stack for next time. So we will keep working through these. And other than that, let's keep the week 2 discussions going. Next week will be the start of week 3, but right now we are still on it. So get into Slack, answer some people's questions, start some discussions, and let's keep going.
All right, and one more last thing is I'm actually working with a consultant. Alex and I were to get all of the Slack messages archived so they can be searched on Google and so forth. So, and that's done in Clojure. So that's been great fun for me. So that's something that we're doing to help serve this community and make sure that we don't lose these. All right, man. Thank you much. Thank you, everybody. Catch you in 2 weeks and on the Slack channel.